Hello and welcome to this Saturday morning session at the Portobello Book Festival. We are the Caledonia Crime Collective, and over the next 45 minutes to an hour we're going to be talking to you about all things Scottish crime. My name is Emma Christie. My debut novel, The Silent Daughter, is set in Edinburgh, but also has a wee bit set in the Highlands. Alan Martin is holding it up over there. So I'm going to introduce everyone on the panel to start with, and then we'll get talking. So start with you, Deborah.
Hello, I'm Deborah Madison, and I write the D.I. Eve Hunter series, which is set in Aberdeen. I've had 2 books out so far. My debut, Hold Your Tongue, the follow-up, Out for Blood, and I'm currently writing number 3 in the series, which is From the Ashes, and will be out next May.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Deborah. What about you, Gareth?
I'm G.R. Halliday, based up in the Scottish Highlands. This is my first novel, From the Shadows, and this is my second one, Dark Waters, and book 3 is going to be out next summer.
Excellent. Alan Martin.
Hi, my name's Alan Martin. I'm speaking to you from currently sunny Bearsden. I've got 2 series of books. The first is The Peat Dead and The Dead of Jura, featuring Inspector Angus Blue, who works in Oban. The third in the series is coming out later this year. There's a snap preview of the cover, The Dead of Appin. But I've also got another series that's set in 1930s Estonia. The first one of that one is Death in Tallinn, and I'm currently writing among the next one, writing it. I've just finished yesterday, got to 70,000 words of Winter Blood, set in Estonia in 1935.
Sounds
That's
brilliant. Hope to hear more about that shortly, Alan. And Andrew Gregg.
Yeah, hi. I'm in the depths of sunny Dunblane. My almost award-winning book, Whirligig, features a character called D.I. Castorfin, and that's set in a very fictional Fort William, although I never actually specify that. And coming out in a few weeks is the next one in the series. So there's a reveal, cover reveal, especially for Portobello Book Festival, which continues the adventures of that character.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andrew. Marion Todd.
Hi, I'm Marion Todd. I live in Northeast Fife, and I write police procedural novels which are set quite close to me in St Andrews. There are 4 out at the moment, and the 5th is coming out this month, and it's called Next in Line, and it features my female detective inspector, Claire Mackay.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Marion. And last but not least, Jonathan Whitelaw.
Hi there, guys. I'm Jonathan Whitelaw. I write the Hellcorp novels about the devil solving mysteries, and also the Cozy Crime series, the Parker Sister Mysteries as well. My new series is out in the new year, April, I believe, the Bingo Hall Detectives. And I'll say this quite quietly, but it's set down in England, sitting in the Lake District. But I'm based in Glasgow. And I am from Glasgow, so there you go. I think I still qualify.
Excellent. So that's given you a wee impression of who we are. Now, my debut novel, The Silent Daughter, was based partly in Portobello. I like to consider myself a local to Portobello as well, since I've got a wee flat just opposite Figget Park. So if you know Portobello, then you'll know that well. And my next novel, Find Her First, is also based in Portobello, and there's a very important scene down at the promenade, so you'll catch that when it's out in January. But in the meantime, let's look at why we're all here. So we're a new group of writers, or a collective, who've come together under the name the Caledonia Crime Collective, which instantly brings up the question, why Caledonia? Why is it relevant that we are Scottish and that we're writing books that are mainly set in Scotland? So we thought that today, over the next 45 minutes, we're going to look at that, look at Scottish crime fiction as a whole, why we're so good at it, us and the wider writing community, and what makes Scottish crime fiction different from crime written in other places. Now, I'm going to start with you, Jonathan. I mean, is there such a thing as a Scottish crime novel? What, that's the question. Is there such a thing, and what is it?
Blimey. Start this battle easy. I got lucky there. Wonderful. It's a great question. It's a fantastic question. Scotland seems to be this real hotbed of talent when it comes to crime fiction. Everybody here on the collective, everyone at the festival, massive crime fiction fans, obviously, and it seems to be year on year. Crime fiction in particular goes through the roof and breaks all these kind of records in terms of sales. And we're very, very lucky in Scotland to have such a fantastic cast of characters, both fictional and as writers. Many of them are on this panel, and many of them, even more of them, are appearing at this festival. What defines a Scottish crime novel? I think setting clearly is a massive part of it. You look at Ian Rankin's books, they are synonymous with Edinburgh. McIlvanney obviously synonymous with Glasgow and kind of wider places as well. Even our own writing, as I'm sure the rest of this panel are aware, when they're sitting down to write novels, as any writer does, you think, well, where are you going to set it? And the great thing about Scotland is that you've got this really, really built up urban area or areas, and then you've got, the wilds, essentially. And both of those kind of sort of, that's a fantastic canvas for any writer, but particularly crime writing can paint on. Mm-hmm. I don't know if anybody else agrees or disagrees, but that's certainly for me.
Yeah. I was going to turn to Marion, actually, because you have a very specific location for your books. Your St Andrews, is where it's the centre of your book. So would you talk a little bit about why you chose that, and would the books be the same if they were set somewhere else? What would happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. Initially, I wanted to write a Scottish book without a Scottish series, but I was attracted to the Inspector Morse novels and the fact that, for me, Oxford is a character in the books, and I almost read them to kind of be there as much as the plot and who did it, and the TV series just exemplified that. And I'm quite visual when I plan a book, and I thought St Andrews is just such an amazing town. It's very small, but it has this massive population. Thousands of students from all over the world come in and swell the ranks every year. And when the students aren't there, or even when the students are there, the tourists come as well. You have golfers and people that come for the history of the place. And then you have these ancient sandstone buildings that are so distinctive, the kind of houses with the crow steps on the roof, juxtaposed with modern buildings and streets of long streets of houses. And it has its own social problems, just as any town does. And I thought it's almost like Scotland in miniature, this little town. And it just, I thought, I can't not set a book here.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, it's fascinating. So you said there it's almost a character in itself.
For me, it is indeed, yes.
Yeah,
and I do begin with place. I always think, right, where is this crime going to start? And events happen, fan out from that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, turning to you, Gareth. So you set your novels in the Highlands. Again, I mean, what do the Highlands add to your book? So do they become a character as well, do you think?
I think so. Like I live in the Scottish Highlands near the city of Inverness, and as like similar to what Jonathan was saying, like for me, there's something about that blend. You have this little city on its own in the middle of all this amazing wilderness, and I kind of like, I think the Highlands just have this unique, such a beautiful area, but also so much space. So you can kind of imagine all this dark, like evil things going on in the outskirts around this central location. I think it's almost like you have the order of the city and then the kind of potential for chaos surrounding. So I find it really inspiring in that one. I think like, yeah, like I think like when it comes to like the character of like a location coming through in the novels, like I think that can really be a powerful thing. I think of it a little bit like going on a holiday. Like if someone does it well, you can kind of imagine yourself going on a nice holiday to like Edinburgh or the Scottish Highlands, or it can be like a kind of positive or a potentially negative thing, like a hellish trip to whatever part of Scotland. Or like, so like when I'm thinking of location, I quite often think about Stephen King And the way like he's writing in Maine, like a kind of relatively small part of America, but he somehow manages to like turn it into the center of the world in his writing. So I kind of always like try and, you know, obviously Stephen King's an amazing level of that, but that's kind of like what I keep in my mind when I'm trying to imbue character from the landscape into my writing.
That's really interesting. Just remind me never to go on holiday with you, Gareth, because there's quite a few bodies at the end of your books, I think. So now I'm turning to Alan now, because you've got a slightly different story, Alan, because your Scottish crime novels are, again, have got a very specific location, and the best named police detective in fiction, Angus Blue, but you also write in a completely different location, Estonia. So in terms of the writing process, I mean, are you able to remove your Scottishness from those books, or what impact does that have, writing in such a different environment?
I don't think that we can remove the Scottishness from us, because that's what we are. We are Scottish, and however it comes out, it will come out. So I can't pretend to be anything else. But on a practical basis, we write about the places we know. We write about the places we know intimately, because that's the way that we understand how those places influence the characters in the story. So I'm kind of disagreeing with the idea that the place is a character, but on the other hand, I think the characters are the people, and it's people who drive novels, because those people make decisions and they take actions, and it's a human process. So in that sense, the place isn't a character, but on the other hand, it's a huge determinant of the decisions that people make. People make decisions according to the landscape where they are, according to the history of the place, the culture, the way that they expect people to behave towards them. So the culture of the place is a very powerful influence on how people make those decisions in the book. Now, I know Oban and that area quite well, but my other book series is set in Estonia. But again, that's a place that we have visited very often. I went through a long process to learn the language, which is very, very difficult. Those 14 different word endings that you have to remember are a bit tricky. But having done that, I understand, I think, the place enough as enough as a foreigner would. And I found that very interesting, because Estonia has many similarities to Scotland. It's a small country. It grew up with big neighbors who always had an eye on it. It was eventually swallowed up by one of them. That was Russia. It coughed it up after the First World War, and then swallowed it again in 1944. So it only just managed to free itself recently. So as a small country, in the 30s particularly, when Estonia was independent, but at the same time, it was in between Stalin's Russia and Hitler's Germany. So the future for small countries in those sorts of conditions was very difficult. And the country itself, where you had, until they became independent, you had a German aristocracy ruling the Estonian people, but above them, you had a Russian government. So you had the Russians at the top, then you had the German landowners, and then you had the poor old Estonians at the bottom. So that sort of history is still there. And even today, if you go today, the attitude and the tension between the Estonians and the resident Russians is palpable.
So the history and the culture of the place really shapes the characters and their decisions.
That's exactly right.
And it's really interesting what you were saying about language, because I know that's something that we've chatted about together. And turning to Deborah Madison now, who is up in Aberdeen. Now, I lived up in Aberdeen for 10 years, and the only Doric I learned was fit like. And that was a bit. What is the thing you say after fit like? Travel Noir or something. I can't remember. Aye. Wow. So I mean, you say that you write in. Well, you don't write in Doric, do you?
No. Born and bred in Aberdeen, so it was a no-brainer for me to set my books there because, you know, I had a real understanding of the place and sense of place. And Aberdeen is a fantastic backdrop for crime fiction because you're talking about the grey granite, everything's dark within the city, the weather is atrocious, you've got the rain, you know, we all moan about the weather constantly, but also on doorstep, as Jonathan and Gareth were saying, is this mountainous land which just opens itself up to all kinds of danger and mayhem, you know. And I think Scottish crime is what it is because of our history, you know. There's such a dark murder kind of history attached to it, you know. There's been all these things as we've kind of came along that lends itself so much to crime, and it is a tradition, and it's just a great place to base it. But yeah, even though I'm born and bred, the writing Doric has never came naturally to me. As much as I've tried to pepper my first debut with it, it was very, very painful. I don't think I would have put that onto the reader. And I don't speak in that myself, even though I'm born and bred. I can have my days of aye, fooey, and min, blah, 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 but it's not really how I want to write. And it's not what I want to read as a reader. You know? I think we can portray Scotland without going down the tartan line and what we're kind of stereotypical needed for, you know. We've got more to bring than that, I believe.
I think tartan is quite a nice addition, however.
Lovely. But I'm not sure about the Tartan Noir kind of ad slogan that's been added to us. I'm a bit out on that.
But I mean, that's really interesting because I think, you know, the Scottish language itself and the Scottish accent, you know, is so distinctive and so known. You know, I live over in Barcelona, and you know, everyone says, "Oh, Emma's Scottish. Let's listen to her speak," because they find our accent so, you know, so fascinating. And you know, as you say, I mean, is it necessary to sort of pepper your books with slang or with dialects? I don't know. I mean, it's an individual choice at the end of the day, but like, you know, would you want to read that? Andrew, Greg, what about you? Because you're up north as well. You know, how much is the language important to you, or what other elements or what other ways do you capture Scotland in your books?
Yeah, language, that's an interesting one. I mean, as you can probably tell, my dulcet tones come from south of the border. I'm probably what Theresa May would describe as a citizen of nowhere, which I take as a compliment because I see myself as a citizen of everywhere. So does Scottish language enter my book? No, not really. There's a few I's. I don't think I have any shortbread in there. I don't think there's any tartan in there. Whiskey does feature. So yeah, I guess that makes it Scottish in a way. Going back to your original point about whether Scottish crime has a distinctive character of its own, I think it probably does, but in a wider sense, insofar as the further north you go, the more brutal perhaps people's imaginations become. You only have to look at the success of Nordic noir to see that. And if you go down south, it all tends, and I'm speaking in huge generalities here, but it tends to get a bit more cozy, your Richard Osmans and such like. So yeah, I think there is a definite shift in how things are perceived and how stories are told the further north you go. And here, almost on the Arctic Circle, I guess we do tend to be a bit colder. And I think that does influence the writing. So yeah, but do you have to intersperse a Scottish novel with lots of Scottish words to make it authentic? No, I don't think so. I think if you're going down that path, you're probably overcompensating, as they might say in Shrek. And does the landscape influence? Yes, I think the landscape does influence a book. I tend to base mine out in the wilds of the Highlands. Probably because when I was a shallow 18-year-old and living in the depths of Wales, I decided it'd be a great idea to work for the Scottish Forestry Commission. So I hitched up and ended up in Fort William and spent a while up and down the mountains and chopping down trees and all that sort of malarkey, and had a really good time and a lovely bunch of people. And that's obviously stayed with me because here in Dunblane, I can hardly lay claim to being in the Highlands, but the influence of those early days does remain. And it's only an hour's drive, so it's not that far for me to go either.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting, this idea that the geography or the location influences the type of book that is written. And I actually did a panel at a different festival, which was looking at the United Kingdom specifically, and Ireland, and the different kinds of novels that come out of the different countries within the United Kingdom and Ireland, and it was fascinating, just to see how big an influence it is, and how I think Alan said, you can't really shake off your Scottishness. And my first novel, The Silent Daughter, is set in Portobello, but a very, very early version of it was actually set in Guatemala, because I was living out in Guatemala at the time, and so I had the same Scottish characters, but a completely different backdrop. And when I discussed it with my agent after a few rejection letters, we thought, well, why don't we rewrite the story in Scotland? And I thought, oh, it'll just be change a few names here and there. But in fact, clearly it completely transformed the story in so many ways. And really at the end, I think the only thing that stayed the same is the prologue, actually. And, it was amazing for me to write in Scotland. I'd never even thought about basing my book in Scotland, to be honest. And once I started, I was like, wow, this is so interesting because I live abroad and I'm looking at Scotland from a different perspective, perhaps, because and it was really a joy to try and recreate Edinburgh and Portobello, and in my next book a bit further north, and just sort of noticing how that influenced the characters and the kind of people I was meeting as well. The book instantly became much darker and bleaker. But I also found that I was able to go much more deeply into the minds of the characters, I think, because there wasn't so much sort of noise going on in the background. When it was set in Guatemala, it was all colours and noises and smells, and there was a lot of recreation of place. But I think the story suffered because of that in some ways, actually, in my case. And bringing it to Scotland was really absolutely key for that story being published.
People in Guatemala are having too much fun, so you need a bit more of a miserable backdrop of Scotland.
Yeah.
So
I needed a bit more rain.
Rain and murders.
Yeah, and it's interesting actually as well. How we're all Scottish. We all moan about the weather. Do you think that the weather, the changeable weather, is also an influence or to what extent do you think it influences the mood of a book and how you can sort of play with that? Jonathan, you're in Glasgow, which is not far from where I was born, down in Ayrshire, and you have a lot of rain down that way. Yeah. How does that influence your story in any way, and if so, how?
From my perspective, it directly influences it, because what I tend to find is whatever the weather is outside, I will do the opposite of what I'm writing at that point. So if it's a lovely sunny day, I tend to write horrible snow scenes and teeming rain, and it happens vice versa. Now this wasn't something that I set out to do. It just seemed to naturally happen, and then I caught myself. I think it was maybe about 2 years ago when I was sitting writing, going, hold on, wait a minute. There's a consistency here between it being really, really nice outside and being horrible in my work in progress, and vice versa. So it's clearly a thing that I do, and it always reminds me of the story about chestnuts roasting on an open fire. Jack Frost nipping at your nose. The guy that wrote that. It was two singer-songwriters. The names escape me, but they were based in Los Angeles, and it was a really, really, really warm, heat wave that the city was going through in the middle of summer. And the guy that sat down and wrote it to try and cool himself down, because the air conditioning was on the fritz, and he couldn't cool himself down. He thought, right, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write a Christmas song, and it's going to be about chestnuts roasting on the open fire, Jack Frost nipping at your nose. And the rest, as they say, is history. But it's but yeah, it's something that I've found myself doing, and you're right, Emma. We always talk about the weather in this country, You know, it's a really there are studies, there are university studies, academic studies on how much we talk about the weather in Scotland and the UK as a whole. And yeah, it does. It has a direct effect on it, and it means that I don't know. I think kind of looking back on it, I probably try and test myself. It's very, very easy. This is going to say this won't come as a surprise to anyone that's read my books, but I'm a very lazy writer, and you know it's very, very easy to sit and describe what's going on outside your window if it's a lovely sunny day with the different colours of trees, different colour of leaves on trees and things like that. But it's harder to do it if it's the opposite of that. So I think I do it just to try and keep myself on my toes. And again, answers on a postcard. If please, anybody feel free to say, no, Jonathan, you're not a lazy writer. You're a wonderful writer. God, it's so wonderful to have you on in the Crime Collective. Silence.
Absolutely delighted to have you here. And one thing, actually, just before we move on to the next question, I mean, looking at the panel, I mean, as a sort of snapshot of Scottish crime writing, I think one of the reasons we brought the collective together was to bring together all these different voices and influences, locations as well, and this sort of massively varied background of ages and jobs and all these different things. I mean, I think the Scottish crime scene, we've been talking about, what makes Scottish crime so Scottish. Is it the location, is it the language, is it the weather? But I think it's potentially also the diversity of it, and I think there's maybe this temptation traditionally to think, it's always a gritty detective and a horrible crime in some dark alleyway in Glasgow. But I mean, look at all of our books, and you go to any festival, whether it's the Portobello Festival or Bloody Scotland or any of the festivals that are on in Scotland, there's such diversity, and I do think that's going to continue. I see a lot of nodding heads, so I'm going to pick on one of the nodding heads, Alan Martin. So what is the future for Scottish crime fiction, do you think?
Oh, that's dare I say, a good question. I think, first of all, Scottish writing is distinctive. There is a distinctive Scottish literary tradition that's different from that of other countries, including England. And I think there's three reasons for that. One is that the Celtic imagination, and I'm not talking about race here, but the culture of the Celts. If you look at Celtic folk tales, they're full of magic and magical creatures and sprites and whatever. And then contrast that with those Anglo-Saxons plodding off their boats with their ploughs. Well, second, you've got the Reformation. We're talking the 1500s here. In many ways, the Reformation wasn't a particularly good thing, because you then had the minister watching you every moment and you had to sit on the stool of repentance if you did something wrong. But there were some very positive things there that, again, were different from other countries. One was the democratic nature of it, the fact that all people, that meant men, could be involved. The second was that not only all people, but people had to be educated so they could read their Bibles, and education became a center point of Scottish culture. And the third thing was morality and philosophy, because the Reformation made people take responsibility for their actions and think about whether they were good or bad. Now, obviously, if you were bad, that wasn't good, but the point about that is that if we look at the Scottish literary tradition, we see this wrestling with philosophy and morality, but people who are educated. So you look at Stevenson, you look at, for instance, Jekyll and Hyde, which is a moral tale. And if you try and demoralize it to kind of make it psychological, it doesn't work anymore. You look at McIlvanney and Laidlaw. The thing about Laidlaw is that, first of all, he's a man of the people, but secondly, he's educated. And that's why his fellow policemen are slightly suspicious of him, because he's a man who has been educated in the Scottish tradition, if you like. And it's interesting that when STV decided to make Taggart, the first thing they did was take away his degree, so that he no longer became the educated man, and therefore they had to get an educated sidekick to kind of contrast with him. So I think those traditions have made Scottish writing what it is, and that's affected crime writing too. So, I mean, I know it's affected me because Angus Blue is a moral character. He's interested in what's right and what's wrong, what's fair and what's not fair, what's just and what's unjust. And therefore, he's not simply content to do what the law tells him to do. And I think that's part of his Scottish background. I think we also in Scotland have a historical background that is not necessarily always a good one. The Kyland clearances, the buy-up of land by big landowners and dispossession of people, the industrial era, which meant awful conditions for very large numbers of people. And I think that has given Scotland a sense of social and political criticism that, again, doesn't necessarily appear elsewhere. That Scots are prepared to speak up and say, no, that's not right. That's not fair. You know, so Churchill was ready to send in the tanks against the Scots because they said that the conditions and the wages weren't so good. So I think those traditions have made Scotland a more vibrant and a more challenging and a more questioning tradition. And we see that in Scottish crime writing as well as philosophy and the general literary tradition. So I think I've completely ignored your question, whatever it was. But I just felt that was we needed to say what's distinctive about Scottish writing. Yeah. Oh, it was about the future, yes. And that means that as long as that tradition stays there, there will be a future. The danger is that that Scottish crime fiction becomes kind of assimilated into the sort of greater British European world tradition, and we end up having sort of rather sort of empty sort of works in which could be set anywhere. So I'm confident that because we are steeped in that Scottish tradition, and we were most of us brought up in it, that Scottish crime writing will survive and will find new ways to express itself.
I mean, and it's obviously it's up to us and the new generation or the upcoming generations of crime writers to keep these traditions going. I mean, one thing that I've been struck by is, you know, it's just the diversity in the styles. You know, it's not always just a police detective and an investigation. There's a lot of historical crime fiction now as well, whether it's true life or completely fictional. There's also moves into the sort of psychological thriller based in Scotland as well, which is I'm sort of at that end of the spectrum as well. So, you know, you have this very solid tradition, but now seems to be expanding and opening up to sort of different styles. I mean, Gareth, what do you, when you look at the future of Scottish crime writing, you know, what's your vision?
Hopefully, Caledonia Crime Collective will be future Scottish crime. Seriously though, I think like you just have to look at the books that are getting shortlisted for, you know, the Bloody Scotland debut prize in the last few years. It's like there's an amazing level of talent coming through, and like I would say that doesn't even kind of scratch the surface of how much good Scottish crime there is around. Like as you say, like a lot of amazing historical fiction being done in Scotland, and yeah, like I'm super excited to see what's coming through, and like I think it's a very bright future for Scotland in the crime sphere.
It does seem to be that you know, it's a massive and ever growing crime community. I mean, Marion, do you feel inspired or intimidated by the ever growing crime community that we have around us?
Probably a bit of both. How can you not be inspired by the fabulous crime writers who've made Scottish crime writing a thing, such that we have our own Bloody Scotland Festival that attracts people from across the world? You know, I mean, last weekend Stephen King was on the festival. I think Scottish crime writing is becoming a kind of almost like a centre for kind of people to gravitate towards and to learn from and enjoy. I love being part of it, and I'm absolutely thrilled to see other writers coming along and not just writing in the sort of the traditional police procedural detective novels that have all been inspired by Laidlaw, but are exploring new ground and moving into psychological thrillers like your own Silent Daughter. And I think across the collective, we have such a spread that you could almost call it subgenres from, you know, the police procedurals that I think probably 4 of us are writing, through to cozy crime at the one extreme, and then the scary biscuit stuff that Gareth writes at the other extreme. So I find it, you know, sometimes when you're at a festival and you see the great writers and you think, oh my word, you know, sit at their feet. And on the other hand, it's hugely inspiring. It's a very inclusive community, and there's no kind of, you know, we're more important than you from the well-known, well-read, established writers at all. Everybody's so willing to give everyone else a leg up.
I think another thing that's interesting, and I'll stay with you, Marion, for this, is it's not just the books themselves that are changing. Do you think that the people who are writing, you know, the kinds of people that are writing, is that changing? Because obviously in the Caledonia Crime Collective, you know, in terms of you know, who we are, you're quite a diverse collection, and you know, as you know, as a woman, it's maybe not the first job that people think you're doing, you know, is you know, and but you used to be a teacher, is that right?
Yes, well, college lecturer.
A college lecturer, you know, and you know, you said, oh, you know, now I'm writing crime, and the fact that you know, there's a fair number of women in the Scottish crime writing community, and I think it's brilliant to see. I mean, in terms of the sort of standing of women within the community, I mean, how do you think it's looking? Is that going to continue, do you think? And
yeah, I think women are storytellers. Sorry, men, no disrespect to the guys in the collective. You're all fabulous storytellers, but I think it comes naturally to women to pass stories down in the kind of oral tradition. And what I think is great nowadays is that publishing, which has traditionally been male, white, middle-class dominated, is really opening up. And particularly, I think you see that within Scotland. There's more work to do, without a doubt. But I think as a collective, we're reasonably representative of what's happening in Scotland. But you know, I think we could. You can never stand still. I think we need to be giving opportunities to perhaps people that might be intimidated. I'm at an age where I think I'm quite confident in my own skin, and quite happy to give my writing a go, and life experience helps with that. So we need to make sure that it's an avenue that's open to people from all walks of life, all ages, all stages.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about you, Deborah, as a young mum? You know, are people surprised when they find out you write scary crime novels?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of friends and family after reading Hold Your Tongue said they would never go near a cliff edge, or, you know, can't come ever again. And I think it does make people question what's going on in the noodle, you know. You come across as one person and on the page you're a different person. I hate blood and guts in real life, I won't lie, but I write about it. And when I wrote my debut, I was coming through quite a difficult, dark time in my life. And without sounding too kind of twee, it was an escape, you know, and I found myself writing very, very dark, which I think all my frustrations and everything else was coming out on the page. But also, as Jonathan said earlier, Scotland's such a great canvas for it. And as Marion said, it's such a great community that's very welcoming, and it can be intimidating. And like you say, I'm not worthy when you're standing next to all these greats, but they welcome you and they don't make you feel different. And from my point of view, I'm from a council estate. I'm working class through and through. I'm back in the house that I grew up with my own children. And you know, sometimes you think, oh, it doesn't happen to people like me. You know, I can't write a book and stand with these greats. And yeah, it can, you know, and if you chase your dream enough and you do it, you get there, and it's a dream come true. But you're standing along people who support you, you know, and make you feel welcome. And Scottish crime writing is so much about that, you know. They make you believe you can do it, and they give you a leg up, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Ian Rankin's been speaking about that as well, you know, the sort of, you know, the need to work hard and give opportunities to children from working class backgrounds, and just to inspire them. I mean, and I think one of the great things that William McIlvanney did was giving a voice, you know, to working class people. I mean, I remember reading Docherty when I was at school. I'm from a coal mining community in Ayrshire, and you know, and he was writing about, you know, the same kind of people, you know, and giving a voice to everyone, I think, you know, does make the community itself more welcoming. I mean, on that note, Andrew, you're obviously you're born. Where were you born exactly? Somewhere down south.
I was born in London. Yeah.
You're born in London, right?
Yeah.
And how does it feel to be, you know, bang smack in the middle of the Caledonia Crime Collective as a Londoner?
Well, it raises interesting points as to what it is to be Scottish, I think, and how my writing can be Scottish and be in that tradition when I haven't come from here. But that's probably a deeper and more philosophical discussion that we can touch on here. Sorry, what was the original question again?
Just, you know, how it feels to be, you know, to be a Londoner and the midst, you know, the Scottish. Your debut novel was shortlisted, you know, for the big Scottish prize. It's set in the Highlands, you know, but you're Londoner. I mean, does it matter?
No, I don't think it does at all. I've been up here now, 30 years or so. So I've spent more of my life in Scotland than in any other part of the country. And I've lived in England and I lived in Wales. What matters, I think, more is probably your life experience, perhaps how open you are to other cultures and all the rest of it. I mean, I've had a very varied life that I touched upon working for the Scottish Forestry Commission. Well, I went from there to designing guided weapon systems, to doing the sound at Glastonbury, to touring the world with bands like Capercaillie, and I got a ribbing from them, I can assure you, for being English. But you know, it's Englishness and Scottishness, they do exist as identities, I think, but I think it's a dangerous path to go down to look at the differences instead of maybe looking at what makes us similar. At the end of the day, we're all people, whether you're black, white, Chinese, African, whatever. We all are born, we all live, we love, we die, we cry. People are people. And although they can be influenced by the culture in which they grow up, does that of necessity make us in any shape or form essentially different to anyone else or our neighbors? I think not. And I think maybe that's why I can come up here, if you like, write a book set in the Highlands, which I really don't know incredibly well, and get shortlisted for the McIlvanney. It's, you know, if anything, it should be an encouragement to everyone to start writing. I only started writing a couple of years ago. Whoops, there goes my earpiece. It never occurred to me that I could write. In fact, a few years previous to this, I was actually doing the sound for the Bloody Scotland festival, and you know, pinning microphones and all these writers. And I never thought I'd be one. It never occurred to me. But one day I just sat and started writing, and I looked at it and I thought, that's a load of not such good stuff. Showed it to a few people who liked it, and just took it from there, really. And the encouragement, I agree with what was saying about the encouragement that people get in the Scottish crime scene is immense. I've not had anyone who's dissed me in any shape or form. It's everyone offering to help, and I think that's one of the great things about the Caledonia Crime Collective, and one of the great things about our essential philosophy of offering a leg up to anyone else who's trying to get on in the very competitive and difficult world of publishing, especially maybe in crime.
Yeah, and I think another of the great ways that writers are supported is through these festivals such as the Portobello Book Festival, which I think we're seeing more and more of these small local festivals which really celebrate readers and writers and create these fantastic opportunities. At this Portobello Book Festival, we've got Val McDermott, we've got Doug Johnson, we've got all of us, we've got Flora Johnson, who's a debut this year. All sorts of writers of all different levels and backgrounds and interests, and just bringing them all together. And I think that part of the community is also just so supportive. You go down to Wigton, you've got a fantastic festival there. Up in the Highlands, there's the Nairn, and I think it's just fantastic to see so much enthusiasm, not just for the crime fiction, for reading in general, but it's, I think obviously crime is one of the sort of most popular genres within Scotland, and absolutely delighted as well to be a part of it. I've been published for just over a year, and like all of you say, I mean, it's been nothing but support from everyone, especially in Portobello, I have to say, as a local writer, and the local community there has been enormously supportive of me, and the local bookshop, Portobello Bookshop. If you haven't been yet, you need to go. It's a really beautiful wee place. So just we're almost out of time. I think just before we close, I mean, I think looking at the we've sort of looked at what it means to be Scottish. Is there such a thing as a Scottish crime book? Is it the landscape? Is it the language? Is it the weather? Is it our history? I think it's a little bit of everything, put together. And then, Andrew saying, well, actually, you don't need to be Scottish, and I think it's great to have that sort of perspective on how wide and how varied the Scottish crime scene is. Many people who are watching this will be readers. And I think it's important what Andrew was saying as well, about being a writer as well, and anyone maybe can give it a go. I mean, Jonathan, a wee word of encouragement for any young Scottish writers if they're at the edge and thinking, this is a big scary world, I'm never going to get inside the circle. What would you say to them?
Rubbish, cobblers, as I always say to these types of things. Just write. It's the best advice I was ever given when I started writing, or started thinking that I wanted to possibly contemplate the opportunity of maybe perhaps writing. You've got to write. You can't edit a blank page, as I'm sure everyone in this collective will agree. Just write. Get it on paper, whether you're writing it down, typing it down. Just write, and then take it from there. The other advice that I would always give to anyone who's wanting to break into the publishing world is educate yourself in the system. It's an industry like any other. And while it might deal with blood and guts and murders and all kinds of carry on within a fictional setting, obviously I have to add that in within a fictional setting. It is an industry, it is a business, and learning the ins and outs of it, who to go to, who to speak to, how to speak to them, what people are looking for. Not talking about marketing and things like that, but knowing about agents, knowing about publishers, knowing about the publishing process and things like that, it will serve you so much good stuff. There's great stuff to learn, and it'll really serve you in the long term for realizing that you can do it, and you're absolutely just keep trying.
Excellent. What about you, Deborah? Any words for writers, young or old, who are starting their journey in Scotland?
I think going back to basics is just keep turning up at the desk and believe. And if you have someone that you can rely on to give you honest feedback, not your sister or your mum or your grandma, but someone who is going to really not hold back from telling you the truth, sign up for courses, improve, read books, get every book about writing you can get your hands on, if that's how you learn. Just keep going at it, and who knows, I was one of those and it happened. Just keep turning up.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Deborah. What about Alan? A word of advice for anyone who's tempted to follow in the footsteps of Angus Blue?
I would echo a little bit of what Andrew said, that you're never too old to actually start writing. I can tell you about my wife's great aunt, who has just published her debut novel at the age of 97. So you're never too old to get into it. And many of the people actually who are coming into crime writing are us greybeards who've had a whole career somewhere else, and then out of the blue, decided to write something. And I wrote this novel. I showed it to my wife, and she said, "Did you write this?" She hadn't believed that something like that was there. And now, as Deborah said, she's the person who will look at what I write and say, "No, this is not good." And Deborah's absolutely right. You need a first reader who is going to give you a fair and honest and sometimes brutal opinion on what you do. So find someone you can trust, because if they give you a bad review for something you've written, when you bring it back to them and they give you a good review, you know that you're doing something right. So you're never too old, and find someone you can trust to read your stuff.
Brilliant. What about you, Gareth? Apart from advising people to jump into cold lakes and go swimming in their
go for a nice cold swim every day.
What else? What else? For anyone out there who's tempted to follow your footsteps.
Like the first thing is just to write every day. I started forcing myself to do 500 words a day, and like if you make yourself turn up, often when you're at the point of really. Like it's almost like you get a little reward from the muse or something. Like if you turn up enough when you really don't want to, those will sometimes be the days that you'll get little gifts of ideas, I've noticed. So I'd say, turn up every day. And actually, it can feel quite intimidating when you feel like you're on the outside and it's like all these agents and so on. And like, it feels like, oh, I'm never going to get anywhere with that. But actually, these are all people that love books. And in my experiences of dealing with people in publishing, it's like, there are a lot of people in there that really love, novels, they love fiction, and they're actually looking to discover someone who's writing they enjoy, and they want to kind of support you and help you to, create a career as a writer. So although it can feel intimidating on outsides, the people are kind of rooting for you. It's not like they want to see you fail or anything like that. So I would, step forward and write every day. And one other tiny thing that I wish someone would have told me is to go into a bookshop. Like if you're aiming to try and write fiction, that might be commercial, and just decide where your book would be on the shelves in there. Because when you start writing, there's like a tendency to just like, you've got something in you that you want to get out, so you'll just start writing, and then when you go to like send it to an agent, they'll be like, "Oh, what genre are you writing?" And it's like, I'm not sure actually. It's just like a mess. So that would be my advice. And cold showers, ice cold swim.
That's the key one. Absolutely key. Excellent. Andrew, a closing word from you. Any top tips?
Yeah, I just echo what everyone said, really, particularly Gareth's genre specialization. The very first thing I wrote was a fairy Tartan Noir, and surprisingly enough, no one wanted it, and I self-published it because nowhere on the bookshelves does it have a section for fairy Tartan Noir. So my next book was the crime novel, which is much more straightforward. The only thing I think I can add to what everyone's already said, which is loads of good advice, is that the biggest adversary to writing is you yourself. I think there's something I'll call the Eton effect. I'll name it here for Portobello. And one of the things I feel that private education can do, and I'm not a product of that by any stretch, is give people the sometimes unwarranted belief in themselves that allows them to take the highest office in the land, even though they're totally incompetent and incapable of doing so. And I think we have to take a lesson from that in some regard, in that all of us are capable of more than we usually think we can. So go out there and be the best you can, really.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andrew. And Marion?
I would say read across the genre that you're writing and read widely. Pick up a novel from everybody You know, don't work your way through one writer's canon. Try and pick up one from here, one from here, one from here, and gradually the good writing will seep into your head almost by osmosis. And I would echo what Jonathan says about being a professional. It's a really horrible cliche, but you never get a second chance to make a first impression. Sorry about that. You need your agent or publisher who's reading your submission to be impressed. So research that very, very carefully. If you possibly can afford it, I would suggest using an editor before you submit, because they can really tell you what's wrong, because there will be things wrong with it. Everybody thinks they've written a great first draft. None of us will ever write a great first draft. It needs fixed. And a professional editor can guide you as to make it a little bit better. So that's worth considering if you think you're at the stage of submitting. And good luck.
Yeah, thank you very much to everyone here in the Caledonia Crime Collective. I mean, my advice that I always give to anyone who's thinking about writing, whether it's crime or anything else, is just persevere. You know, you won't get it right first time. You may get 400 rejection letters before you get the book deal, but you know, just keep going. And I think that's one of the reasons that particularly in Scotland, you know, we have this fairly close-knit writing community, and you know, whether it's events at Portobello Library or held by the bookshop, whether it's the Porty Book Fest, or just someone at a wee local writing group, you know, there's always a network to support you if you're looking for it. And here, you know, that's why we came together as the Caledonia Crime Collective, is to support each other and hopefully to reach out and support other writers, and of course offer lots of amazing books to readers as well. So just before we sign off, if you want to give a wee flash of your books, and I'll say a huge thank you to everyone who has tuned in, and a massive, massive thanks to the Portobello Book Festival for inviting us along to chat. And you will see us again if you follow us on Facebook or Twitter. You'll see any upcoming events that we have. We're hoping to do a lot of different kinds of events and programmes in person and online in the future. So thanks to all of the Crime Collective, thanks to Porty Book Festival, and thanks to everyone who's watched. We will see you next time.